Are you thinking of investing in Tesla? Not sure if it is a good time to buy? I challenge you to instead ask, do you understand and believe in Tesla? I'll be going over Tesla technical analysis, FSD 12, Robotaxi, Optimus, and the affordable 25K model. Technical analysis. So here you can see our Tesla chart, and you can see right about here. So this is November 16th. It was actually about a day after this that the S&P inclusion was announced for the Tesla stock. And you can see right here we're at 162. So this was about the price that it closed today, somewhere around 162. And you see that it's pretty much been consolidating in this large triangle here. And I think eventually, if it keeps consolidating, it's probably going to break out once it reaches the apex. It's going to get tighter and tighter here. So I will be on a lookout to see which direction it goes. But you can see that we're pretty much buying at a price right before or right about the announcement of the S&P inclusion way back in 2020. So I think right now we're buying it at a pretty good price. So if you're thinking of buying it just based on the technical analysis aspect, I would say it's like a pretty good time, but not financial advice. Tesla is not just a car company, but an AI and robotics company. So here's an overview of everything that Tesla does. You see we have humanoid robots, FSD, the ride hail, the AI compute, auto bidder, energy storage, solar charging, battery cells, vehicles, insurance, and much more, right? But this video, what we're going to be focusing on is the humanoid robot, FSD, the ride hail, and the vehicles. So let's start off by looking at FSD 12, also known as full self-driving. So the idea of full self-driving is you want to go from point A, say Los Angeles, all the way to point B, say San Francisco, all doing this autonomously. So if we're looking at the Model 3, some things you want to understand is that the way this works is you want to imagine that as a human is driving, we have eyes that looks at the road. So the equivalent of this is a car with eyes using cameras. So here you have a camera in the back, a second camera on the side, a third camera on the other side, and then a fourth camera also on the side, a fifth camera on the side, and right here on the top, there's 3 cameras. So I don't know exactly which cameras Tesla uses, but there's a total of 8 cameras on the exterior. There's one inside the car that actually monitors you right now to see if you're sleeping or using a phone. But right here we have 8 external cameras, and all of these cameras could be used for some of the visualization in terms of their training process. So the idea of the whole FSD12 is that they have an end-to-end architecture. So what does end-to-end architecture mean? So the idea is that you have a neural network here, and the input is a camera video frame. So we talked about the 8 cameras that's available. So the training process, we're going to be taking these video frames, feed it into some neural network, and the output are 3 things. We have the wheel angle, acceleration, and decel, which is the brakes. So there's really only 3 possible ways, and just as a human would be driving the car, we would just be looking at the road and determining these 3 actions. And this is the exact same way FSD12 works. So the training process, the idea is to find the weights offline. So the same input and output is typically recorded when someone is driving. And based on these recorded values, you have expected input and expected output. And the idea is to find some weights inside this model. Okay, so after you find these weights, then you have something that can be used to do the prediction. Okay, so inference is a term that you'll hear a lot. Elon Musk recently mentioned it in his earning calls, but he uses the term inference a lot. But the idea of inference is actually using these weights that you determine during training while driving. Okay, so you have some model that's inside your car, and you're going to get some weights that's been trained, and then based on that, you do the prediction. So the prediction part which is figuring out the 3 actions. That is called inference. So in practice, you may actually have a very large model, probably billions of parameters. So the previous image was a simplified one, but just imagine that this model could be actually very complex, even though it's still taking the input of just the camera video frames, and the output is the wheel angle, accel, and decel. So every time we roll out with a new version like 12.3.3, 12.3.4, and so on, typically what happens is that Tesla is doing more training and it's getting more weights. And therefore, it pushes some updates and you maybe see some improvement in performances. I've done some test drives here in 12.3 and 12.3.3 and 12.3.4. You could go ahead and check out those videos. But here we have a graph that Tesla recently announced, and this mentions the cumulative miles driven with FSD. And you can see from this graph, this is over a course of like 3 years, the amount of miles is skyrocketing, right? It's increasing exponentially. So what does this mean for the investor looking at this, right? So as you guys know with AI, the more training data you have, the more accurate your model. The more accurate your model, the better the performance, right? So that's why having this amount of miles driven with FSD is gonna, largely impact how quickly Tesla can actually accelerate in their development with FSD, and of course getting closer and closer to full autonomy. So here's the second chart that was showed in the earnings. But you can see here is the Tesla AI training capacity, which is the H100 equivalent GPUs. So why do we care about GPUs, right? So this specifically is for the training. So the problem is the problem with having more training data is that you're going to have a longer training time. So they've increased it from about like 15,000 to like 35 plus thousand capacities. So definitely more than double, and this is going to help them do the training process a lot. And because of this increase in compute power, they're able to do the training much faster. So this will really help them speed up the process of training. So as we get more data, you get more accurate, you have the computing power to support this. So ideally, the 2 graphs that we looked at should both be exponential because you want to support more and more data with enough hardware. So unsupervised FSD adoption, some states already have adopted autonomous vehicle laws. But where we're at right now is ultimately we need to show that the autonomous car is going to be safer than the human driver using data. So we need to back it up somehow. I know it's probably going to happen eventually. We just don't know exactly when, but I'm pretty optimistic that Tesla will solve the full autonomy problem. So they also have talks about FSD licensing. So what does that mean? So currently, there's other automakers that's thinking about borrowing FSD from Tesla. But the main thing is that, if you guys understand how these models work, there's typically certain configurations. So they probably will expect to use the same cameras and the inference computer. But the main thing is the same cameras because you need to have like similar points of views. If another car decides to put a camera at a drastically different place, I would expect the behavior of the model to be a little bit different. So let's now talk about Robotaxi. They also termed it Cybercab. So the idea of Robotaxi is that, people could get from point A to point B like calling an Uber, but in addition to that, the main point is that you might have designated vehicles for Robotaxi, but also people who own Tesla, they can actually contribute to the fleet as well. It's kind of like Airbnb where you have a house and then you're like, okay, I'm going to rent out my house. The same thing with the Tesla, right? So let's say you drive to work, maybe it's a 30-minute drive, and then you're at work, and maybe your car is just sitting in your parking lot, right? So you could actually, during the time when you're working, your Tesla could actually be making you money and being part of this fleet and driving other people around. Okay, so that's the idea of using Tesla to contribute to fleet. And then also he's considering using like distributed inference among many vehicles. So maybe you need to do a lot of prediction and computing power, possibly with AWS. So the idea is you have all these vehicles that could have a shared computing power because there's a bunch of hardware. using all the resources to do any sort of predictions that's necessary to make this full autonomy happen. So it might be all these cars communicating with each other and things of that sort. So they also showed some apps, previews of how the app could look like. So the idea is you might pull up your phone and then they have some app and you summon it and they'll give you some wait time, right? And then after that, you have some destination. It shows you that, okay, this autonomous vehicle is coming up. Maybe you could set your climate, and then you tell it where you want to go exactly. And then after that, you could have another screen that verifies the climate here, because maybe some people like it cold or some people like it hot. So you could kind of play around with that. There's a very nice customization. Me personally, I like it very chilly. So 68 is like the perfect temperature, especially for sleeping. So after that, you'll get another screen and it's saying like, oh, it's arriving now. Maybe it'll mention some capacity and so on. And then after that, you could actually set up your music. So it'll show you an estimated time and everything. And you could play around with what soundtrack you want your car to have. And like Elon Musk says, the idea of going inside a car from point A to point B should be something like going in an elevator that takes you from one floor to another floor where you pretty much don't have to think about anything. Okay, so where are we at in terms of the level autonomy? So level 0 is no automation, where just the humans driving. You have level 1, where it's a driver assistance, which is the basic like cruise control and lane keep. And level 2 is a partial automation, which is like auto steering, auto accel, auto braking. That's kind of where we're at right now. And all of these requires human monitoring, right? So you have level 3 conditional automation. So here the driver can actually start diverting attention, and driver needs to be ready if requested. Level 4 is high automation. So here during malfunction, the driver doesn't need to intervene. But again, this is with limited conditions. And level 5 is full autonomy, and it's going to work under all conditions and no driver needed. So you don't even need a wheel, pedals, or anything. This is going to be the ultimate implementation of Robotaxi, but in terms of how long it might take, I'm not quite sure. It might be several years from now. Hopefully not, but I'm pretty optimistic that Tesla can solve this problem. So let's now take a look at Optimus. So as you guys know, Optimus is their humanoid robot. It's meant to do repetitive tasks. Here you can see that it's folding clothes, but the idea is it should be able to expand to many other tasks that are repetitive, especially environments of like production where they're assembling things, or even in like kitchens where they're cooking. It could be like a personal assistant at your home that is like a nanny for you, maybe like a child caregiver, anything of that sort. So the idea is you have certain tasks and you want to automate that. And the potential architecture is probably going to be very similar to the FSD, where you have some input of camera video frames, usually for a given specific task, like we described earlier. And the output is going to be motor angle. So you have the arms moving, the fingers moving, you have some sort of joints moving that give you some desired motion. And combined with all the motion would be some trajectory that ultimately helps you produce some task that you want the robot to do. And again, the training process and all of that will be very similar to the FSD, which we talked about earlier. So what he thinks is that by the end of this year, it's probably going to start having limited production in natural factory doing useful tasks. And at the end of the year, they're probably going to start selling it externally. And Elon Musk thinks that it's going to be more valuable than everything else combined. So this is actually pretty exciting. As you guys know, robotics has been in development for a very long time, but there has not been a full model in production yet for people to use. So once this is out in production, I'm sure with their whole vertical integration, it's looking like very likely that's going to happen. And let's now talk about the affordable model, the 25K model version. So we don't know how it's going to look quite yet, but as we know that we're trying to help with the environment, with the whole pollution and everything. So not sure how long it's going to take to fully change all the gas vehicles to EV. It's probably going to take much longer. Initially, they had a 20-30 day projection in terms of the conversion, but that might take longer. But in terms of the actual production of this vehicle, Elon Musk thinks that it's going to start early 2025 or even late this year. So he's going to announce it more in the August 8th Robotaxi conference meeting. But pretty excited to see where this is going. I think with this cheaper car, there's going to be a lot more people buying Tesla, and this could also be contributing to the fleet as well if people don't want to contribute their vehicles. Okay. So hopefully you found this video helpful, and give a like and subscribe, and I'll see you in the next one.